An incredibly significant development in the special counsel investigation. The New York Times reporting that Trump's former White House chief of staff, Mark Meadows, has testified before the grand jury that special counsel Jack Smith has been using in both of his investigations, both into January 6 and also into the possible mishandling of classified documents down at Mar-a-Lago. Now, according to the Times reporting, it's unclear if he has testified in just one of those investigations or in both. But he is arguably the most significant witness that the special counsel could speak to, certainly in the January 6th investigation, but he could potentially also have valuable information in the classified document probe as well. Now, in recent months, folks around former President Trump have expressed some concern, some puzzlement about exactly what was going on with Mark Meadows, because they told us that they didn't have any communication with his legal team. They were unclear what exactly was going on with him. They've even said on our air that there was no communication between Trump's legal team and Meadows' legal team, which raised a lot of questions about whether he was indeed cooperating with investigators.
Hey friends, Adam is here. So what just happened, guys? Mark Meadows, the man whose office was closest to the Oval Office, who knew everything and saw everything, has been sitting in a grand jury room and talking, not spinning, talking. And what he said reportedly demolishes the central pillar of Trump's entire legal defense. Simultaneously, over 70 members of Congress have put their names on the permanent record demanding removal.
These are major developments today. We have never seen a former president face this type of legal uncertainty. Mr. Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, now the latest member of the former president's inner circle to fold and cooperate with prosecutors who are charging Mr. Trump with trying to undermine the 2020 election.
He was former President Trump's last chief of staff and one of his most ardent supporters. But tonight, Mark Meadows has been granted immunity in exchange for grand jury testimony against Mr. Trump in the 2020 federal election interference case. ABC News, first to report Meadows, has testified before a grand jury at least 3 times. Meadows reportedly told the grand jury that he informed Mr. Trump his claims of widespread election fraud were, quote, baseless, and that he was being, quote, dishonest with voters when he declared victory on election night.
No cameras in the grand jury room. No theatrical Hollywood moment. Just the quiet, sealed, legally binding testimony of the ultimate insider converging with a public legislative revolt. And the quiet version is infinitely more dangerous than any dramatized version could ever be. Let us establish the foundation upon which this entire structure rests.
And today, Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, appeared in court in Fulton County in an attempt to move his charges from state court to federal court. Meadows was present on a phone call between Trump and Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger.
Mr. President, everybody is on the line, and just so this is Mark Meadows, the chief of staff.
When the president asked for additional votes to overturn the election.
I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have.
Meadows, who unexpectedly took the stand today, testified that he organized the call as a federal official, acting under color of his office.
Mark Meadows was not a peripheral figure in the Trump White House. He was not a junior aide fetching coffee or a distant advisor who popped in for the occasional holiday party. He was the chief of staff during the most tumultuous and legally consequential period of the entire administration. He occupied that role through the final desperate weeks of the campaign, through the post-election period of legal challenges and pressure campaigns, and all the way through the violent culmination of January 6th. He was present in the room for every significant decision. He was a participant on the critical phone calls.
We are learning new details from thousands of newly released text messages involving former Trump chief of staff Mark Meadows and the deadly January 6th assault on the Capitol. The latest messages to be made public include numerous texts from Republicans close to Trump pleading with him to do something to stop the attack. Even former Trump chief of staff Reince Priebus texting in all caps, "Tell them to go home." Plus, Donald Trump Jr. begging Meadows to push his father to make a statement, texting, "He's got to condemn this expletive ASAP." The Capitol Police tweet is not enough.
His phone was a buzzing hive of text message activity with members of Congress, outside legal architects, and family members of the president. He saw everything that was planned. He heard everything that was discussed. He witnessed everything that was decided. He was not standing on the edges of the frame, observing the action from a safe distance. He was at the dead center of the hurricane. And according to detailed reporting from ABC News and corroborated by other major outlets, Meadows has testified before federal grand juries on multiple occasions.
According to ABC, Meadows also told Mr. Trump that his former attorney Rudy Giuliani had failed to find any evidence of election fraud. All this after the Supreme Court denied the former president's election challenge. Special counsel Jack Smith has charged the former president with trying to overturn the results of the 2020 election and obstruct the certification of the electoral vote, which culminated with the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol.
It really is extraordinary that those who are close to Trump and who are providing him with legal counsel and political counsel are now accepting that they committed criminal wrongdoing and are testifying under oath against him.
And during that testimony, he told prosecutors something that shatters the glass. He said that he personally warned Donald Trump that the claims of widespread election-altering voter fraud were baseless, not unproven, not questionable, not, "we need more time to investigate." Baseless. That is the specific word that has been attributed to his testimony.
Mark Meadows, who was former President Donald Trump's chief of staff, was granted immunity today in the federal elections interference case. He now says that he warned Trump that claims that the 2020 election was a fraud were false.
He told the President of the United States directly and to his face within the confines of the West Wing that the entire narrative of a stolen election was not supported by reality. There was no credible evidence to sustain it. And according to Meadows, Trump heard that warning and proceeded anyway. He kept telling his supporters the election was stolen. He kept demanding that state officials somehow find the precise number of votes needed to flip the outcome. He kept applying a vice grip of pressure on the vice president to reject certified electoral slates. All of it. Every speech, every tweet, every phone call to Georgia. All of it happened while his own chief of staff, the man paid to manage the truth for him, was telling him in private that the foundation of it all was a lie. Come on, are you kidding me? That is not a footnote in a legal brief. That is the entire ballgame. Why is that specific detail so devastating? Because the defense that Donald Trump has constructed around his conduct regarding the 2020 election and its aftermath has always, without exception, rested on a single precarious pillar, the pillar of sincere belief. The argument, repeated ad nauseum by his legal teams, his political surrogates, and the man himself, is that he genuinely believed the election had been rigged against him. He was not lying to the public. He was merely mistaken. He was not attempting a coup. He was fighting for what he honestly, in his heart of hearts, thought was right. He was deceived by bad lawyers or misled by faulty data. He was a true believer acting on a conviction that, while ultimately incorrect, was held in good faith. That has been the shield. That has been the firewall protecting him from the most serious legal and political consequences. And Mark Meadows, his own guy, the man who slept in a room just a short walk down the corridor from the Resolute desk, has now told a federal grand jury that the shield is made of paper. He told Trump the fraud narrative was baseless. Trump kept pushing it anyway. That is not a description of sincere belief operating in good faith. That is a description of a deliberate, conscious choice to continue propagating a known falsehood after being confronted with the truth by the one person best positioned to deliver it. Legally, politically, and morally, those are two entirely distinct categories of behavior. One is potentially defensible as free speech or political posturing. The other has a different name entirely in a court of law, and prosecutors know exactly what to call it. And then there are the text messages. This aspect of the Meadows story deserves its own spotlight because it illuminates the depth of his involvement and the breadth of his knowledge. During the investigation conducted by the House Select Committee on the January 6th attack, Meadows turned over a staggering volume of communications, thousands of text messages, and the contents of those messages reveal something that a significant portion of the public still has not fully metabolized, even with the passage of time. Mark Meadows was not a passive observer of the events surrounding January 6th. He was not standing mutely in the corner while history unfolded around him. He was an active, engaged, and central participant in the operational discussions. The messages show him communicating with members of Congress about strategies to delay or obstruct the certification of the electoral count. They show him in contact with outside political operatives and legal advisors who were actively pitching schemes to overturn the results. On the very day of the attack, as the mob breached the perimeter and began smashing windows, Meadows was exchanging messages with people inside the Capitol complex and with outside figures who were advocating for the use of the National Guard in ways that some of the messages described as being aimed at protecting pro-Trump people. He was in the nerve center. He was on the text chains. He was in the room where the operational decisions were being made. And now, years removed from those events, he has been sitting down with federal prosecutors and telling them what he saw, what he knew, what he personally warned the president about. This is not a story about a loyal soldier who kept the faith and took the secrets to his grave, as Trump has always expected his inner circle to do. This is a story about a man who, for whatever combination of legal pressure, personal conscience, or pragmatic self-preservation, made the decision to flip. And when the chief of staff flips, the damage is not superficial. It is foundational. It is specific. It is documented under oath and penalty of perjury. And it is a permanent feature of the legal landscape that no amount of rally rhetoric or social media fury can erase. Now, we must pivot to the present tense because this is where the narrative threads weave together into a single alarming tapestry. While the Meadows revelations continue to simmer in the background of federal proceedings, the president is back in the White House and he is operating with the same playbook, just applied to a new and infinitely more dangerous arena. He took to his digital platform and posted a message directed at the nation of Iran. The message concerned the Strait of Hormuz and demands related to its reopening. And the language he chose to employ was not the calibrated, cautious language of traditional diplomacy. It was the language of annihilation. He posted that a whole civilization will die tonight. Those were the actual words, a whole civilization, posted from the account of the President of the United States. That specific, time-stamped, and globally broadcast threat was the moment that the dam broke. It was the line that transformed simmering concern into open constitutional revolt. More than 70 Democrats in the House of Representatives looked at that post, placed it in the context of the years-long pattern of behavior that Meadows and others have now documented, and decided that the moment for quiet disapproval had passed. They rushed to microphones. They issued formal statements. They went on to the official record of the United States Congress and said, in unison, that this must stop, and that the Constitution provides the tools to stop it right now. Senator Ed Markey, Representative Ayanna Pressley, Representative Seth Moulton, a combat veteran who knows the weight of military action in a way that most politicians never will. Moulton put it with stark, unmistakable clarity. Regardless of any temporary ceasefire, Trump has already committed an impeachable act, and Congress must act before he does further harm to our nation and the world. Those are not the words of routine political opposition. Those are the words of elected officials who have reached a genuine, deeply held conclusion that the occupant of the Oval Office represents a clear and present danger. When have we heard language like this from this many people, deployed with this level of coordination and urgency? This is not a normal news cycle. This is a genuine breaking point. Let us excavate deeper into the layers of this story, because the true significance lies in the connections that the mainstream narrative often misses. To understand why the Meadows testimony is so utterly destructive, you must first understand the architecture of the defense it demolishes. And then you must appreciate the specific, irreplaceable weight of the person delivering the blow. This is not a crack in the facade. This is the load-bearing wall giving way. Once you internalize that perspective, you begin to see that the Iran threats, the congressional demands for removal, and the quiet cooperation of the former chief of staff are not three separate, unrelated news items jostling for space in the headlines. They are a single, unified story. It is the story of an individual who has operated outside the accepted norms and legal boundaries since the moment he first took the oath, who is continuing to do so right now from the most powerful platform on the planet, and whose own closest confidants have already begun to confirm the pattern under the penalty of perjury. Let's examine precisely what Meadows is reported to have said and why the specific wording carries such immense legal weight. The reporting indicates that Meadows told the grand jury he warned Trump directly that the fraud claims were baseless. He did not say we haven't found the evidence yet. He did not say the lawyers are still working on it. He said baseless. The foundation does not exist. Furthermore, the reporting suggests Meadows informed prosecutors that Trump was being fundamentally dishonest with the American electorate when he stood before the cameras on election night and prematurely declared victory, long before any legitimate count had been finalized or any state had been called by a neutral arbiter. While the chief of staff knew the numbers did not support that declaration, the president went out and made it anyway. This matters because it goes directly to the element of intent. The entire legal argument for why Trump should escape accountability for the cascade of events leading to January 6th has always been predicated on the notion that he was a victim of his own delusion. He wasn't lying, he was just wrong. Meadows, the man he trusted to run his White House, has now allegedly testified that this narrative is false. He was told the truth. He chose the lie. That is not sincere belief. That is a calculated decision. And prosecutors are trained to recognize the difference. The text message archive adds another layer of concrete, contemporaneous evidence to this portrait. Meadows did not just provide recollections, which can be hazy or self-serving. He provided a digital fossil record of his communications, and that record shows him deeply embedded in the operational planning. He was discussing the potential use of the National Guard in the context of the January 6th rally. He was fielding messages from lawmakers who were actively brainstorming ways to throw the election to the House of Representatives. He was a hub of information and coordination. And now he has been sitting with federal prosecutors, explaining the context of those messages, identifying the participants, and clarifying what he knew and when he knew it. This is not a story about a loyalist who remained silent. This is a story about a witness who has provided a roadmap to the inner workings of the conspiracy. And when the chief of staff provides that roadmap, the people who were hoping the map would stay hidden face a very different kind of journey. And now we bring this forward to the current moment. The president posts a threat promising the death of a civilization. He is targeting Iran. He is making demands related to the Strait of Hormuz. And the language he chooses is so extreme, so far outside the boundaries of acceptable presidential rhetoric, that it triggers an immediate and historic response from the legislative branch. More than 70 members of Congress publicly call for his removal from office within a short window of the post going live. This is not a small or routine occurrence. Removal from office, whether through the impeachment process outlined in Article 1 or the 25th Amendment mechanism, is the nuclear option of American politics. Elected members do not invoke it lightly. They understand the political capital it expends. They understand the personal and professional relationships it strains or severs. They understand the target it paints on their backs, and 70 of them did it anyway. They did it because they looked at that post, and then they looked backward at the full, documented pattern of behavior that stretches back years, and they concluded, aloud and on the record, "We have seen enough. The trajectory is clear. This cannot be allowed to continue." Here is the pattern those 70 members are pointing to. In the aftermath of the last election, the president was told directly by his own chief of staff that his claims of a stolen victory were baseless. He ignored that warning. He continued to propagate the lie because retaining power mattered more to him than telling the American people the truth. That specific documented choice led directly to a violent assault on the United States Capitol. It led directly to the first attempt in American history to forcibly prevent the peaceful transfer of presidential authority. And now, years later, the same individual is sitting in the White House issuing public threats about the destruction of entire civilizations because a foreign government is not bending to his will. The consequences for millions of actual human lives appear to be an afterthought, if they are a thought at all. Can you see the through line? It is not subtle, from lying about a stolen election to threatening a civilization. These are not isolated incidents that coincidentally share the same protagonist. These are data points in a clear, unmistakable, and escalating pattern. It is the pattern of a person who determines what he wants and then works backward to manufacture whatever justification is necessary to obtain it. Facts are irrelevant, laws are obstacles, the human cost is collateral damage. Representative Seth Moulton, a man who has worn the uniform of this country in combat, articulated this pattern directly when he stated that regardless of any temporary ceasefire, Trump has already committed an impeachable act and Congress must act before he does further harm. That is a sitting member of Congress stating on the record that the President of the United States has met the constitutional threshold for removal, and he is not a lone voice crying in the wilderness. Senator Ed Markey has added his name. Representative Ayanna Pressley has added hers. Dozens more form a growing chorus. This is not fringe noise. This is a genuine, organized political movement forming in real time inside the halls of Congress, using the Meadows revelations and the Iran threats as twin pillars of a single argument. This president is fundamentally unfit for the office he holds. Let's address the specific mechanics of the 25th Amendment because it is a term that gets thrown around frequently but is rarely understood with precision. The section being discussed, Section 4, provides a mechanism for the Vice President and a majority of the principal officers of the executive departments, the Cabinet, to transmit a written declaration to the President pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House. That declaration must state that the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. Upon that transmission, the Vice President immediately assumes the role of acting President. The sitting President can then contest that declaration. If he does, the Vice President and the Cabinet have 4 days to reaffirm their position. If they do, Congress must convene within 48 hours and has 21 days to decide the issue. A 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate is required to permanently remove the president and keep the vice president in charge. The constitutional bar is extraordinarily, deliberately high. It has never been successfully invoked in the history of the Republic. But the reason Democrats are talking about it anyway is not because they necessarily believe they can clear that 2/3 hurdle in a Republican-controlled chamber. They are talking about it because the conversation itself is a constitutional statement. When 70 members of Congress stand up and say, "We are seriously discussing the 25th Amendment," they are making a formal public assertion that the president's behavior has crossed a threshold into the realm of genuine unfitness. That is a political statement with constitutional echoes. And with 70 members already on the record, it is a statement that is becoming progressively harder for their colleagues across the aisle to simply dismiss as partisan theatrics. Let's break this down into the 4 essential takeaways that you need to carry with you from this analysis. There are many moving parts in this story, and the sheer volume of information can be overwhelming. I want to ensure you walk away with a crystalline understanding of what is real, what is documented, and what comes next. The sincere belief defense is dead. Mark Meadows killed it. The core of Trump's legal and political survival strategy has always been the assertion that he genuinely, honestly believed the election was stolen, that he was a true believer, however misguided. Meadows, the man closest to the operational center of the White House during that entire period, has reportedly told a federal grand jury that this is categorically false. He warned Trump the claims were baseless. Trump proceeded anyway. That testimony, sitting in federal records, is a direct, first-hand refutation of the good faith argument. It paints a portrait of a president who was confronted with the truth by his most trusted aide and made a conscious choice to perpetuate a falsehood because the falsehood served his immediate political interests. That is not a mistake. That is a decision, and the distinction is one that carries immense legal and historical weight. The Iran threat is not an isolated gaffe. It is a direct and predictable continuation of the operating pattern that Meadows documented from the previous era. When Trump posted that a whole civilization will die tonight, he was applying the same logic he applied to the election. He wants an outcome. He is not getting it. He escalates to the maximum possible threat level. The consequences for others do not enter the calculus. In the first instance, the consequence was the shattering of democratic norms and a physical attack on the Capitol. In this instance, the consequence is the potential for mass civilian casualties on an international scale. The scale is different. The stakes are exponentially higher, but the underlying operating system is identical. And 70 members of Congress have now publicly stated that they recognize this pattern and consider it to be an ongoing danger. The removal push is real, it is organized, and it is larger than the initial headlines might suggest. More than 70 Democrats are now on the record. They have named specific constitutional mechanisms. They have identified specific impeachable conduct. This is not a random collection of angry tweets. This is a coordinated, public, and constitutionally grounded demand. It represents the most significant legislative push for presidential removal in the current era. Crucially, this push is not based on a single incident. It is based on the accumulation of evidence. The 2020 lies, the January 6th attack, the Meadows testimony, the Iran threats. The members calling for removal are pointing to a tapestry of behavior and saying, collectively, that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts and that it proves unfitness for office. That is a far more robust argument than one based on a single misstep, and it is gaining volume. This story is unfinished. It is an open wound in the body politic. The Meadows grand jury testimony exists. The text messages are archived. The Iran posts are time-stamped on a permanent server. The congressional statements are part of the official record. None of this material decays. It is all building a permanent legal and historical record. And every new incident adds another layer to the case being constructed by both federal prosecutors and members of Congress. The question now is one of thresholds. Will the removal conversation move from public statements to formal articles of impeachment? Will the 25th Amendment discussion evolve from political rhetoric into an actual procedural maneuver? Will the sealed grand jury testimony of Mark Meadows ever see the light of day in a public trial or a congressional hearing where the entire nation can witness it? Any one of those developments would represent a seismic shift in the political landscape. The people who are pushing for removal right now understand this. They are not just filling airtime. They are building a record, methodically and deliberately, piece by piece, designed to be used when the next moment of crisis arrives. Here is the bottom line. You have a former chief of staff, the gatekeeper of the Oval Office, who has reportedly told federal prosecutors that the President of the United States knowingly lied to the entire nation about the integrity of an election. You have that same president, now in a second term, using the official platform of the White House to issue threats of civilizational annihilation. And you have more than 70 elected members of the United States Congress stating, on the permanent record, that this combination of past deceit and present danger necessitates his removal from power before further harm is inflicted on the country and the world. That is not a routine political squabble. That is not a news item you can casually swipe past. That is a constitutional crisis being described in real time by the very people whose job it is to identify one and respond. And most of the country is still processing it as if it were just another noisy afternoon in the Capitol. It is not. The pattern is documented. The insiders are talking. And the members of Congress who are paying attention have already started saying out loud what that pattern means for the immediate future of the American experiment. Stay tuned. The next moves from Congress and the courts will determine whether this is the beginning of a true reckoning or just another chapter in a long, slow decline.